The Nommo are ancestral spirits, sometimes referred to as deities, worshipped by the Dogon tribe of Mali. The word Nommos is derived from a Dogon word meaning, to make one drink. The Nommos are usually described as amphibious, hermaphroditic, fish-like creatures. Folk art depictions of the Nommos show creatures with humanoid upper torsos, legs/feet, and a fish-like lower torso and tail. The Nommos are also referred to as masters of the water, the monitors, and the teachers. Nommo can be a proper name of an individual, or can refer to the group of spirits as a whole. The Dogon tells the legend of the Nommos, awful-looking beings who arrived in a vessel along with fire and thunder. After they arrived here they put out a reservoir of water onto the earth and dove into the water. There are references in the oral traditions, drawings and cuneiform tablets of the Dogons, to the human-looking beings who have feet but who are portrayed as having a large fish skin running down their bodies. The Nommos were more fish-like than human, and had to live in water. They were saviors and spiritual guardians. The Nommo divided his body among men to feed them. That is why it is also said that as the universe had drunk of his body, the Nommo also made men drink. He gave all his life principles to the human beings. The Nommo was crucified and resurrected and in the future will again visit the earth, this time in human form. Later he will assume his amphibious form and will rule the world from the waters. Dogon mythology is known only by a number of their priests, and is a complex system of knowledge. Such carefully guarded secrets would not be divulged to friendly strangers very easily. If the star Emia is eventually discovered in the Sirius system, this would give considerably weight to the Dogon story. The Nommos, who could live on land but dwelled mostly in the sea, were part fish, like merfolk, mermaids and mermen. Similar creatures have been noted in other ancient civilizations, Sumer, Babylonia's Zoans, Akkadia's Ea, Sumer's Enki, and Egypt's goddess Isis. It was from the Nommos that the Dogon claimed their knowledge of the heavens. The Dogon also claimed that a third star, Emia, existed in the Sirius system. Larger and lighter than Sirius B, this star revolved around Sirius as well, and around it orbited a planet from which the Nommos came. Sirius A. According to Robert Temple's book The Sirius Mystery, the Dogon, a tribe of about 100,000 in Western Africa, have had contact with extraterrestrials. One of Temple's main pieces of evidence is the tribe's alleged knowledge of Sirius B, a companion to the star Sirius. The Dogon are supposed to know that Sirius B orbits Sirius and that a complete orbit takes 50 years. One of the pieces of evidence Temple cites is a sand picture made by the Dogon to explain their beliefs. There are a number of other astronomical beliefs held by the Dogon which are curious, e.g., traditional belief in a heliocentric system and elliptical orbits of astronomical phenomena, knowledge of satellites of Jupiter and rings of Saturn, among other things. Where did they get this knowledge, if not from extraterrestrial visitors? They don't have telescopes or other scientific equipment, so how could they get this knowledge? Carl Sagan concludes that the Dogon could not have acquired their knowledge without contact with an advanced technological civilization. He suggests, however, that civilization was terrestrial rather than extraterrestrial. Western Africa has had many visitors from technological societies located on planet Earth. The Dogon have a traditional interest in the sky and astronomical phenomena. As Sagan notes, if a European had visited the Dogon in the 1920s and 1930s, conversation would likely have turned to astronomical matters, including Sirius, the brightest star in the sky and the center of Dogon mythology. Furthermore, there had been a good amount of discussion of Sirius in the scientific press in the 20s, so that by the time Grial arrived, the Dogon may have had a grounding in 20th century technological matters beyond their understanding brought to them by visitors from other parts of Earth and transmitted in conversation. Sagan notes that some of the discussion of the day involved the nature of white dwarfs. For example, Sirius B is a white dwarf, an extremely dense star, e.g., about a ton to the cubic inch. Chronologically, the earliest of these amphibious entities would appear to be the Babylonian fish people. They were known to the Babylonians as the Anfuti, which translates as repulsive, But notwithstanding their unappealing appearance, they were sufficiently influential for the Babylonians to accept their teachings and acquire from them the fundamental tenets of civilization. The most august member of the Antiquity was Oannes, portrayed in ancient Babylonian depictions as a curious, complex hybrid of human and fish, with a bearded man's head beneath the head of a fish, and the body of a fish borne upon the back of a man's body. According to Babylonian legends, this aquatic deity would come on land during the day to teach the people, and would dive back at night into the Persian Gulf, where he lived in an underwater palace called the Aksu. Was Oannes the original Nommo? Equivalent to Oannes in the religion of the Philistines at Philistia, in what is now Israel, was a human-bodied, fish-tailed deity called Dogon. Further to the west, Pharos in northern Egypt was said to be the home of the old man of the sea, a shape-shifting amphibious deity known as Proteus, son of Oceanus, and renowned among the ancient Greeks as an oracle. Significantly, their traditional legends specifically claimed that he often sheltered in a cave to avoid the heat of Sirius. The Dogon are an ancient people of Mali in northwestern Africa. Presumed by anthropologists to be rude African humans, they inhabit an almost inaccessible, inhospitable desert south of Timbuktu and south of the Niger River on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert. Because there are no paved roads, no electricity, no surface water, and little contact with the outside world, the Dogon territories in the Hombari Mountains have been called the end of the earth. Indeed, the word Timbuktu in the 16th century, a thriving metropolis of 1 million Muslims and now reduced to a crumbling village of only 10,000, is synonymous with barren desolation at the end of nowhere. Anthropological studies by the French in the 1930s and more recently by British anthropologist Robert Temple have revealed a stunningly complex and sophisticated Dogon society. But what has amazed and mystified researchers most is the fact that the Dogon have a quite unusual and extensive knowledge of the star system Sirius. For centuries the Dogon have held as their most sacred religious tradition a body of knowledge of the star Sirius which should be impossible for any primitive tribe to know. They consider, for example, that the most important star in the sky is Sirius B, a small star that orbits the bright star Sirius. But Sirius B is invisible to the unaided eye and was only photographed via telescope for the first time in 1970. Their ancient drawings show the helical rising of Sirius with the Sun and Sirius joined together. They show the rings of Saturn and the 4 major moons of Jupiter, as well as the elliptical orbit of the invisible star Sirius B around Sirius, and relate that, not only is it a dense and heavy star, which it is now known to be far more dense than Earth, but correctly note that the elliptical orbit is completed once every 50 years, an event they celebrate at exactly the proper moment, even if only once or twice in a person's entire lifetime. Robert Temple suggests that the only access a primitive African people could have had to such sophisticated knowledge of a distant and invisible star system would be through the visit to our planet in ancient times of extraterrestrial beings who somehow described and explained from whence they had come. To add to the mystery are strange cliff dwellings that were carved into the Hombari Mountains above the Dogon villages many centuries ago. But the rooms are far too small for normal-size humans to live in. Dogon legend has it that these dwellings were inhabited by a long-vanished people they call the Little Blue Men. The best interpolation of this story that I have come across is the one in the book, The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, by Drunvalo Melchizedek. This is also one of the best books on the market on the subject of sacred geometry. Robert Temple was one of the first people to reveal certain facts, though scientists had known for a long time about an African tribe near Timbuktu called the Dogons. This tribe holds information that is impossible for them to have by any standards in our view of the world today. Their information destroys everything we think we know about ourselves in regard to being alone. You see, the Dogons have a cave on their land that stretches way back into a mountain, and in this cave are wall drawings over 700 years old. One particular man, the holy man of their tribe, sits at the front of this cave to protect it. This is his lifetime job. They feed him and take care of him, but no one can touch him or get close to him. When he dies, another holy man takes his place. In this cave are amazing drawings and bits of information. I'm going to tell you about two of these bits, and these are only two of many. First of all, we are referring to the brightest star in the sky, with an apparent magnitude of 1.4, Sirius, now called Sirius A. If you look at Orion's belt, those three stars in a row, and follow the line downward to your left, you see a very bright star, which is Sirius A. If you follow them upward about twice the distance, you see the Pleiades. The information in the Dogon cave specifically showed another star rotating around Sirius. The Dogons are very specific about this star. They say it's very, very old and very small, and that it's made out of what they called the heaviest matter in the universe, which is close, but not actually correct. And they say that it takes close to 50 years for this small star to rotate around Sirius. This is detailed stuff. Astronomers were able to validate the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf, in 1862, and only about 15 or 20 years ago could they validate the other information. Now, stars are very much like people, as you will begin to see. They're alive, and they have personalities and many qualities like we have. On a scientific level, they have growth stages. They start out as hydrogen suns, like ours, where two hydrogen atoms come together in a fusion reaction to form helium. This process creates all the life and light that's on this planet. As a star further matures, another fusion process begins, the helium process, where three helium atoms come together to form carbon. This growth process continues through various stages until it gets all the way up through a particular level of the atomic table, at which point the star reached the length of its lifespan. At the end of its life, as far as we know, there are two primary things a star can do. New data on pulsars and magnetars give other options. 1. It can explode and become a supernova, a huge hydrogen cloud that becomes the womb for hundreds of baby stars. 2. It can rapidly expand into what's called a red giant, a huge explosion that engulfs all its planets, burns them up and destroys the whole system, then stays expanded for a long time. Then slowly it will collapse into a tiny old star called a white dwarf. What the scientists found rotating around Sirius was a white dwarf, which corresponded exactly to what the Dogons say. Then science checked to see how much it weighed, to see if it really was the heaviest matter in the universe. The original computations made about 20 years ago determined that it weighed about 2,000 pounds per cubic inch. That would certainly qualify for heavy matter, but science now knows that this was an extremely conservative estimate. The newest estimate is approximately 1.5 million tons per cubic inch. Black holes aside, that would surely seem to be the heaviest matter in the universe. This means that you had a cubic inch of this white dwarf, which is now called Sirius B. It would weigh about 1.5 million tons, which would go right through anything you set it on. It would head toward the center of the Earth and actually oscillate back and forth across the core for a long time until friction finally stopped it in the very center. In addition, when they checked the rotational pattern of Sirius B around the larger Sirius A, they found it to be 50.1 years. Now, that absolutely could not be a coincidence. It's just too close, too factual. Yet how did an ancient primitive tribe know such detailed information about a star that could be measured only in this century? But that is only part of their information. They also knew about all the other planets in our solar system, including Neptune, Pluto and Uranus, which we had discovered more recently. They knew exactly what the planets look like when you approach them from space, which we have also only recently learned. They also knew about red and white blood cells, and it had all kinds of physiological information about the human body that we recently learned. All this from a primitive tribe. Naturally, a scientific team was sent over to ask the Dogons how they knew all this. Well, that was probably a big mistake for these researchers, because if they accepted that the Dogons really have this information by default, they must accept how they got it. When they asked, "How did you learn this?" the Dogons replied that the drawings on the walls of their cave showed them. These drawings show a flying saucer. It looks like that very familiar shape coming out of the sky and landing on three legs, Then it shows the beings in the ship making a big hole in the ground, filling it with water, jumping out of the ship, into the water, and coming up to the edge of the water. These beings look very much like dolphins. In fact, maybe they were dolphins, but we don't know for certain. Then they started communicating to the Dogons. They described where they came from and gave the Dogon tribe all this information. That's what the Dogons said. The scientists just sat there. Eventually they said, "No, we didn't hear that." Because it didn't fit into anything they thought they knew. They just kind of hid the information somewhere under a carpet in their minds. Most people, scientists included, just do not know what to do with these kinds of facts. There has been a lot of information like this that we just don't know what to do with. Since we can't find a way to integrate this unusual information with what we already think we know, we just stick it away somewhere because the theories don't work.